All right, first let's start with matters that regard education, and Professor George Magoha's revocation of the appointment of Professor Kiama to be the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi was yesterday suspended by the Labor Relations Court here in Nairobi. He says Professor Kiama never had the confidence of President Uhuru Kenyatta, who felt was not consulted in the process that led to the coming up of Professor Kiama to lead the University of Nairobi, the biggest higher learning institution in the country. So we are starting with that note, and it's equally highlighted on the second page of the Daily Nation here as illustrated on the front page. If we can have that up on here, Madam Director. Yes, and says that I acted on President Uhuru Kenyatta's orders. That is Professor George Magoha, who yesterday was in Kibra constituency to oversee the 100% transition from primary to secondary education in the country. Coming to you first, Victor Marende, it's equally an important point with regards to the consultation process. The university's council that has the mandate to come up with the next vice chancellor, and the division it has led among, or has created among the student leaders at the University of Nairobi and across the country. Is it one that perhaps will dent the reputation of the most high learning institution in the country?
I really never want to comment about University of Nairobi because I'm an undergraduate alumnus and still a student. So it might
rub people the wrong way.
Rub shoulders in a way that is not good. But all that notwithstanding, I believe the power wrangles at the University of Nairobi have been there now for almost 5 years. Since Magoha left the university, probably in 2016, or at the end of 2015, there has been a power vacuum in the university that was also necessitated by the scrapping off of the Unions Act that allowed universities to have unions, but instead allow them to have associations that are controlled by the university administrations. If, and I say if, the universities had strong student unions, these are things that you can see, I can confidently tell you. But then this was so intentional that you denied the students power because you realize the students at the University of Nairobi are very silent, as if nothing is going on. That is one. Two, the staff union seems also not to be voicing seriously when the university seems to be entrenched in power struggles. So I would really want to plead with the students at the University of Nairobi and students across the nation, and the staff unions across the nation and within the University of Nairobi, to give their opinion on this. But then my sole opinion on this, I still believe that you can't appoint someone who is not number one in an interview and appoint a number 3 or 4 for an interview. The
same problems we had with the IEBC.
Yes, and you realize that Professor Kiama, however much of a good friend he is to me, he wasn't the number one in that interview. And Magoha is acting in good faith. When Magoha was appointed as the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, he was the number one in that interview. And he was the most qualified then. Now, when Professor Mbidi was appointed because he was the number one in that interview that they did, and Professor Njoroge came second. We did an interview again this time round, and Professor Njoroge was number 1. Kiama was number 3, and Professor Guti was number 2. So I believe on merit, then Njoroge was the most qualified. So you cannot appoint someone who is least qualified, then expect more schooled or equally schooled men like him and women to accept that, okay, you are appointed and you are the best. And if you really want to trace the rise of Professor Kiama from an insider's point of view, Professor Kiama vied to be the dean of students in Upper Kabete. He lost terribly and got only 3 votes when a number 1 got almost 100 votes. Then very fast he was promoted to be a director in an institute, in the institute of Professor Wangari Maathai at the university, where there are only 3 professors, himself being the 3rd one when he was appointed. He didn't even finish his term, was promoted to be a principal in Upper Kabete. Didn't finish his term, was promoted to be a DVC at the university. Within a period of 6 months of being a DVC, He's a vice chancellor. That doesn't make sense.
What do you think
But,
then?
but doesn't it
Okay.
speak about a situation where someone is good at what they're doing? What would you assume that does not make sense? Or is it in regards to the time periods that are supposed to be there, of course, for such appointments to be made, or what?
Linda, you can't be that good.
Oh, really?
You can't be that good. You know, when you look at the duration between his PhD, leave alone being a professor, he got a PhD in 2001.
Yeah.
You know, 2001 to 2019, academically, is a very short period to warranty that you now are vice chancellor in a very senior university like the University of Nairobi. To me, it doesn't make sense. Maybe to someone it made sense so that he was appointed. And back to what Professor Magoha did. It is precedence and history that the top three names of those who are appointed are always taken to the president. That has been precedent. Those three names must go to the president. University of Nairobi is not a private university.
All right, it's a public institution.
It's a public institution.
But equally, the committee that is set to come up with the vice chancellor has an independent sort of capacity.
The council.
So where do we draw the line here?
Let me tell you.
Also overlook the legal aspect of it.
In the university council, in the university charter, and the charter that constitutes the council, on the role of the appointment of the vice chancellor, the charter only says that they will conduct interviews. Now, the powers bestowed upon them are not to appoint. When they conduct interviews, then they come up with a list, and they give the top three. And if I know you can do proper research, Ayub.
Yes.
I want you to do research on how Mbidi was appointed, and who are the top three, and what happened then. Kaimenyi was the then cabinet secretary.
Yes, cabinet secretary, 2015.
Yes. And Kaimenyi was a former DVC at the University of Nairobi. So he knew how things had to happen and how that appointment was done. You will realize that he was appointed by the president after the approval of the university council.
So where is the breakdown here in terms of the approval process at the committee level or the appointing authority, which is the president now says I was not consulted, his office was not consulted. Therefore, is it perhaps a case of wanting to pile an exogenous pressure on an independent committee that is set to come up with a vice chancellor? So where do we draw the line here?
You know, where we don't agree is that pressure is piled on an independent council. The council is independent in as much as interviews are concerned, where no one interfered with the interviews that the council did. Everyone applied and they were interviewed.
Okay.
Now, it is the same case as in the appointment of the commissioners at the IEBC. There is a committee that does the interviews, comes up with a list,
All right.
then takes the list to the president for appointment,
Okay.
even in the judges. So they did their part well, and they gave the top three in that interview.
Okay.
And I believe Magoha is not a madman. Magoha was a VC at the University of Nairobi for 10 years.
Of course, he knows the inner
He
dealings.
knows what should happen.
Okay, yes. That's
Legal issues then come in regards to this, and I think there's probably need for us to, yes, like you rightfully put it, read hard and also understand the entire, of course, structure of getting these VCs on board. Like, for instance, then this particular legal issue that comes on board in regards to the changes of law that played out, that probably a majority would not have gone by that, and it states that the Law Miscellaneous Amendment 2018 Act, which was signed into law in January last year, that should be 2019, by President Kenyatta, took away the power of university councils to advertise, interview, and recommend for appointment top university managers. Would they have overlooked this particular one?
Yeah, it was the powers were donated to the cabinet secretary. Yeah.
Then that's
So
another hullabaloo.
Magoha is very right on
Extremely
this.
right in regards
but
to the same.
that, of course,
Then the
not
battles of
withstanding
the
the
courts,
suspension.
the courts are supposed to interpret the laws as it stands right now. So why then proceed to revoke that move by Magoha, knowing very well, because then what then plays out in regards to this, and what does it speak about the battle that we still have on board in regards to the judiciary and equally the executive?
I think there's a vacuum when it comes to interpretation of these laws. You see, when there's an executive mandate, like the one Magoha has, and then there's a constitution that also is a bit lean on some things, then it brings squabbles and war in such appointments. And you see, the appointment that we are seeing right now, I envision with interests that people have. And that's why you see the professor, Magoha himself has directed the EACC to conduct some investigation in the university. Because, you see, he went ahead even to suspend the council and the Senate.
No, he didn't suspend the Senate.
Not the Senate, the council.
And
okay?
the VC.
And the VC. Why? Because there were improprieties that were that were made within the institution. Now, when you come and pick a third person and not the first person, now where are you placing the competence of the institution? This is a very serious institution where we need to have competent persons at the helm. We don't just need to have, we don't need to get to those times whereby we pick those people who have just present themselves and done a little bit good.
Yeah.
You see, like the issue we had with IBC, okay? When Hassan was picked, he was not the best. And you saw what translated to that. And these are some of the things that we need to avoid. When we have sharp and good managers in place, like Magoha, who comes out and explains to why he has done so, then it gives us the better way of understanding. And that's why we need to indulge in all these things. We need to participate in all these things. Let us not leave everything to ministers or institutions. Let us all participate in. Let us all get aware of them, so that we cannot come and say this person is involving himself in these things because he has personal interest. He highlighted so many, and I also watched an interview of another professor from the same university where he claimed the council has interest in placing someone they know they'll be able to transact business with. And that's why even Magoha himself directed the EACC to come and do investigations in all those things. Now, when you talk of the security firm that is there, it is for an individual. The same company that is offering security firm, the same company that is offering insurance to the university. It's the same security firm the same company that is doing the supplies, major supplies at the institution. So these are some of the things that need to be looked into. Why? Okay? Why are you placing somebody who is compromised? Okay? Is it because of the business interests at heart? And when we go that way, then we are going to kill our institutions.
Okay.
Because we are going to turn into entrepreneurs and other things and other interests that will kill the institution. The education of the institution will now deteriorate.
Okay.
And that's what we don't want. We need to protect our institutions.
Okay.
Institutions like this.
Which is equally important with regards to the stature of the University of Nairobi. Fred, if I may come to you, we have recently seen reports by the papers across the country that the intelligence agency is now at the forefront of the appointments in the country with regards to spies who have been placed in all public institutions. Did this inform the president that perhaps Kiama might be having questionable capacity to lead the University of Nairobi, and thus the decision by Magoha?
Well, I have not seen that circulation, and also I would not want to base my arguments on it that there are spies around these institutions.
Fred, but the president said nowadays he relies on intelligence.
Also, I can neither confirm nor dispute. That is what I am saying. So whether the president has or doesn't, that is not going to form the basis of my argument. So my argument will be simple, that it is unfortunate that politics has found its way into one of the largest institutions in this nation, and that is the University of Nairobi. And as my able colleagues have put it clearly, it is wrong and it will send a very wrong precedent if we conduct interviews to pick a third qualified person to override the first qualified for whatever reason, using whichever law, especially if the process purports to be based on merit. So I think the CS, based on the law that was reviewed and assented to in 2019, that revoked the powers from the council and transferred them back to the CS, then I think the CS was within his rights. That notwithstanding, the courts have pronounced themselves. There's a pending case in February that has been taken to court by Kiama that seeks the interpretations of the court. So we will await for that. But as it stands, I think the council acted ultra vires their powers because, as it has been clearly stated, they do not have the appointing authority. There is an appointing authority, and there is a procedure that needs to be followed such that once they have finished conducting the exercise of interview, they forward the names to the president. And I think the president, in consultation with either with the CS of education and something like that, will then
allow the CS
to appoint the VC.
Then,
so
okay.
yes. So I think actually I'm through. So you can just.
I just wanted to say something
Briefly.
You know, you realize that for the very first time, the University of Nairobi had a vice chancellor that only served 1 term. That is Professor Mbidi. Quite unfortunate. Now, look at Professor Mbidi's term vis-a-vis what the University of Nairobi has been. And look at the management that he put in place. For the first time in 4 years, students at the University of Nairobi have no serious accommodation within the university premises.
Okay.
He closed down almost 10 hostels without replacement, purporting to have given someone a tender to build another hostels, but I'm sure the money was eaten. EACC needs to talk about it.
Okay.
We are having a university that the vice chancellor awarded tenders, security tenders, to a private individual, Mr. William Samoei Ruto, in this country, which is so wrong.
And that is the political aspect that...
that is the political aspect
yes, exactly,
that we won't allow in our
which has infiltrated an institution of Nairobi University stature, and that is a concern.
So we really know, we don't need a council that takes orders and doesn't follow the rule of law.
What matters is independence.
But why should they wait, maybe as we get to wind up on this one, why should it wait to that point whereby, there's also this declaration for them now, the CS and the likes, to come to act with knowledge, proper knowledge of what is enshrined on the laws that are there, of course, the 2018 amendment, and then it has gotten to a point whereby the naming has been done and someone has actually occupied office for them to come in and now say, counter the appointment at this particular level. And also not just talking about the question of Nairobi University, but technically most of our universities. There's strangles we've witnessed for the longest of time at some point in Moi University. As it stands right now, Garissa University, Bomet University, they have cases in court as it stands in regards to the leadership, as today. So, I mean, why shouldn't we counter some of these activities before they get to this particular point?
Linda, it was noted so early. You'll realize Professor Mbidi never completed his term.
Right.
He was suspended.
Yes.
Then Professor Mbeche acted.
Yes.
A good professor who has served the university diligently for the longest time possible. Acted in that position. Now, when Professor Mbeche acted, he even saw the transition. Now, as the council should, they advertised the position of the VC.
Yes.
They are applicants, and they conducted interviews within their rights. Now, the only contravention that they are now having is that after conducting these interviews, they didn't submit the names. They went ahead to appoint.
And that is the question.
And that is the
the consultation.
Yes.
All right.